The Cincinnati Children's Hospital hummed with its familiar morning rhythm as Dr. Sarah Martinez pushed through the double doors of the pediatric oncology ward. October air carried the scent of fallen leaves through the hospital windows, mixing with the sterile smell of disinfectant that had become as natural to her as breathing. She'd been working these halls for 12 years, and every morning still brought the same mixture of hope and heartache that defined her profession. "Morning, Doctor." "Martinez," called out Jessica, the head nurse, as she updated the patient board with colorful markers. Each name represented a child fighting their own battle, each color-coded status a small victory or setback in their journey toward healing. "How's our crew today, Jess?" Sarah asked, tying her dark hair back into its usual ponytail. At 42, she carried herself with the confident stride of someone who had learned to balance compassion with clinical expertise, though the lines around her eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights spent worrying about her young patients. Tommy Chen's fever broke overnight, which is fantastic news. His parents barely slept, but they're smiling this morning for the first time in weeks. Jessica's voice carried the particular warmth that pediatric nurses develop, equal parts professional efficiency and maternal instinct. "And we've got little Emma Rodriguez starting her second round of treatment today. She's nervous, but her older brother Miguel has been reading to her all morning." Sarah nodded, reviewing the charts on her tablet. Each case was a puzzle, a delicate balance of medicine and hope. Tommy, 8 years old, had been battling leukemia for 6 months. His parents, first-generation immigrants who ran a small restaurant in Chinatown, had initially struggled with the language barriers and complex medical terminology, but their dedication to their son had inspired the entire medical team. "What about room 314? Sarah asked, referring to Marcus Williams, a 15-year-old who'd been admitted 3 weeks ago with osteosarcoma in his left leg. Jessica's expression grew more serious. "Tough night. The pain medication isn't managing as well as we'd hoped, and he's been asking a lot of questions about the surgery options. His mom, Patricia, is trying to stay strong, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You know how it is with the teenagers. They understand too much sometimes." Sarah understood perfectly. Treating adolescents required a different approach entirely. They couldn't be comforted with cartoon bandages and sticker charts. They asked direct questions and deserved honest answers, even when those answers were difficult to give. The morning rounds began in room 302, where 5-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat cross-legged on her hospital bed, her bald head covered with a bright pink bandana decorated with unicorns. Her 7-year-old brother Miguel sat beside her, holding a worn copy of Charlotte's Web, their mother's choice for helping Emma understand friendship and courage. "¿Cómo te sientes hoy, mi amor?" their mother Rosa asked softly, brushing her hand across Emma's cheek. Rosa worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and watching neighborhood children during the day, but she'd rearranged everything to be here with Emma throughout the treatment. "I feel okay, Mummy," Emma replied in her small voice, though Sarah noticed the way she held her stomach, a telltale sign that the nausea was bothering her again. "Miguel was telling me about Charlotte the spider and how she saved Wilbur." "That's right, Pequeña," Miguel said seriously, his young face showing wisdom beyond his years. "Charlotte was brave, just like you." Sarah approached the bed with a warm smile. "Good morning, Emma, and good morning to my favorite reading assistant," she added, ruffling Miguel's hair. "How are we feeling today?" "Dr. Sarah?" Emma's face brightened. "Miguel says that after my medicine today, maybe I can walk to the playroom and see the fish tank." "That sounds like an excellent goal," Sarah replied, checking Emma's vitals while maintaining the conversation. The little girl's pulse was steady, her temperature normal, and her spirits remarkably high considering what lay ahead. "But first, let's talk about today's treatment. You remember what we discussed yesterday?" Emma nodded solemnly. "The special medicine that fights the bad cells, but it might make me feel sick for a little while." "That's exactly right. And what do we do if you start feeling sick?" "Tell you or Nurse Jessica right away and drink lots of water, and try to eat the crackers even if I don't want to." "Perfect. You're going to do great today, Emma." Sarah turned to Rosa, switching to Spanish. ¿Tiene alguna pregunta sobre el tratamiento de hoy? "No, doctora. Creo que entendemos todo," Rosa replied, though Sarah could see the worry in her eyes. "¿Cuándo sabremos si está funcionando?" "We'll do another scan in 2 weeks, and we should have a good picture of how Emma's responding to the treatment," Sarah explained. "Remember, these things take time, but Emma is strong and responding well so far." The next stop was Tommy Chen's room, where the atmosphere was markedly different. 8-year-old Tommy sat at the small table by the window, working on a math worksheet while his father, David, reviewed inventory sheets from their family restaurant. His mother, Lynn, dozed in the reclining chair beside the bed, finally getting some rest after 3 days of fever-induced vigilance. "Tommy," Sarah said quietly, not wanting to wake Lynn, "I heard you had a much better night." "My head doesn't hurt anymore," Tommy replied, looking up from his worksheet with bright eyes. "And I was hungry this morning. Daddy brought me congee from the restaurant, but the nurses said I should eat the hospital food too." David Chen looked up from his papers, offering a tired smile. "Dr. Martinez, we cannot thank you enough. When the fever broke at 3 a.m., Lynn actually cried tears of relief. We have been so scared." "It's wonderful news, Tommy. Your body is responding exactly the way we hoped it would." Sarah examined Tommy's latest blood work results on her tablet. "Your white cell count is improving, which means the treatment is working. How are you feeling about starting school lessons with Mrs. Patterson next week?" "I miss my friends at school," Tommy admitted, "but Mrs. Patterson says she can help me video call my class sometime so I won't fall too far behind." "That sounds perfect. And Tommy, I want you to know that being in the hospital doesn't mean you're missing out on being a kid. It just means we're taking extra good care of you while your body gets stronger." The most challenging visit was always room 314. Marcus Williams lay propped up on pillows, his laptop balanced on his knees as he worked on a history assignment about the civil rights movement. At 15, he was tall for his age, with the lean build of someone who'd been a star on his high school basketball team before his diagnosis. His mother, Patricia, sat in the corner, grading papers from her 5th grade classroom, trying to maintain some normalcy in their drastically changed world. "Morning, Marcus," Sarah said, noting how he immediately minimized whatever he'd been looking at on his computer screen. "How's the pain level today?" "It's manageable," he replied, though Sarah could see the tension in his jaw and the way he favored his left leg even while lying down. At 15, Marcus was old enough to understand the full implications of his diagnosis and young enough to feel robbed of his future. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, pulling up a chair beside his bed, "I know we've talked about this before, but I want to make sure you're comfortable asking me anything that's on your mind. No question is too big or too scary." He was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Cincinnati skyline. "Dr. Martinez, I've been reading about my type of cancer online. I know what the statistics say." Patricia looked up from her papers, her expression pained. She'd been dreading this conversation, but knew it was inevitable. "Marcus, statistics are important for helping us make treatment decisions, but they don't tell individual stories. Every case is different, and every person responds differently to treatment. What specific concerns do you have? Will I ever play basketball again?" The question came out quietly, but Sarah could hear the weight of everything behind it. Basketball wasn't just a sport for Marcus. It had been his identity, his future, his scholarship to college. "That's going to depend on how you respond to treatment and what surgical options we end up choosing," Sarah replied honestly. "What I can promise you is that we're going to focus on getting you healthy first, and then we'll explore every possible option for maintaining your mobility and strength." Some of the articles I read talked about prosthetics for athletes. There are Paralympic basketball players who... Marcus trailed off, as if saying it out loud made it too real. "Marcus, you're getting way ahead of yourself," Patricia interjected, her voice tight with emotion. "We don't even know if surgery will be necessary yet." "But Mom, we have to be realistic about, let's focus on today," Sarah interrupted gently. "Marcus, it's natural and healthy to think about different possibilities. It shows you're processing everything maturely, but your mother is also right that we're still in the diagnostic phase. The scans we're doing this week will give us much clearer information about the best path forward." Marcus nodded, though she could see his mind was still racing with questions and fears. "Dr. Martinez, can I ask you something else?" "Of course. How do you do this job? How do you come in here every day and tell kids like me that everything's going to be okay when you don't really know if it will be?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, struck by the maturity and directness of his question. "Marcus, I don't tell any of my patients that everything's going to be okay because I can't make that promise. What I can promise is that we're going to fight for you with everything we have, that we're going to be honest with you about what we're facing, and that no matter what happens, you're not going to face it alone." "That's actually more comforting than I expected," Marcus admitted. "Good, because that's the truth, and you deserve the truth." As Sarah finished her morning rounds, she reflected on the delicate balance of hope and honesty that defined her work. Each child brought their own challenges, their own fears, and their own remarkable resilience. Tommy's fever breaking was a tangible victory, something to celebrate and build upon. Emma's bravery in the face of treatment inspired everyone around her, including her 7-year-old brother, who was learning lessons about courage that most adults never fully grasp. And Marcus's mature questions reminded her that teenagers in the oncology ward were dealing with adult fears while still being children in so many ways. The afternoon brought administrative duties, insurance consultations, and treatment planning meetings. But Sarah's mind kept returning to her patients. She'd learned over the years that being a pediatric oncologist meant carrying pieces of each child's story with you, celebrating their victories and mourning their setbacks as if they were your own family members. As the October sun began to set over Cincinnati, painting the hospital corridors in warm golden light, Sarah prepared for the evening shift transition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new test results, and new opportunities for hope. But tonight, Tommy Chen would sleep peacefully without fever, Emma Rodriguez would dream of unicorns and brave spiders, and Marcus Williams would continue asking the hard questions that showed he was still fighting. The evening nurses arrived with their familiar chatter about weekend plans and family dinners, and Sarah updated them on each patient's status. As she gathered her things to leave, Jessica approached her with a curious expression. "Doctor Martinez, did you notice anything unusual in the lobby today?" "What do you mean?" "I had to run down to admissions this afternoon, and I could have sworn I saw Pete Rose sitting in one of the chairs by the information desk. You know, the baseball player? He was just sitting there quietly, not talking to anyone, no cameras or anything. Seemed to be watching the kids in the play area." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Pete Rose was Cincinnati royalty, despite his complicated legacy. Charlie Hustle, they'd called him, the hometown hero who'd played for the Reds during their glory years in the 1970s. "Are you sure it was him?" "Pretty sure. I mean, he's older now, but that face is hard to mistake if you grew up in Cincinnati. Thing is, he was dressed like he didn't want to be recognized. Baseball cap pulled low, regular clothes, nothing flashy. If I hadn't looked twice, I might have missed him completely." "Huh, that's interesting. Did he talk to anyone?" "That's the weird part. He was just sitting there watching, but not in a creepy way, you know? More like, I don't know, like he was waiting for something or maybe working up the courage to do something." Sarah pondered this as she walked to her car. Cincinnati was full of celebrities who preferred to keep low profiles, especially older sports figures who'd learned the value of privacy over the years. Still, something about the image Jessica described, Pete Rose sitting quietly in a children's hospital lobby, struck her as both mysterious and somehow touching. The drive home took her through the neighborhoods surrounding the hospital, past the houses and apartments where her patients' families returned each night to empty bedrooms and worried conversations. She thought about Rosa Rodriguez, who would tuck Miguel into bed tonight while Emma slept in her hospital bed, and Patricia Williams, who would grade papers until late into the night because staying busy was the only way to keep the fear at bay. As Sarah pulled into her own driveway, she realized that tomorrow would mark the beginning of something different. She couldn't have known that the mysterious figure in the lobby would return, or that his presence would spark a chain of events that would transform not just her patients' experiences, but her own understanding of what healing really means. The evening air carried the sound of children playing in nearby yards, their laughter a reminder that childhood should be filled with simple joys rather than medical procedures and uncertain futures. But inside Cincinnati Children's Hospital, her young patients were creating their own version of childhood resilience, finding ways to laugh and hope and grow, despite circumstances that would challenge the strongest adults. Tomorrow, she would return to find Tommy working on another math worksheet, Emma listening to Miguel read another chapter, and Marcus asking more thoughtful questions about his future. What she couldn't predict was that a legendary baseball player's quiet presence would soon become the catalyst for a series of moments that would remind everyone involved why they'd chosen to dedicate their lives to healing children. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that October often brought to Cincinnati. Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived at the hospital 15 minutes earlier than usual, her mind still puzzling over Jessica's observation about Pete Rose from the day before. As she walked through the main lobby, she found herself scanning the seating area near the information desk, though she wasn't quite sure what she expected to find. The morning routine proceeded normally until around 10 a.m., when Sarah was reviewing Emma Rodriguez's latest blood work results with Dr. Michael Peterson, the chief of pediatric oncology. The numbers were encouraging. Emma's white cell count was stabilizing, and her body was tolerating the chemotherapy better than they'd initially hoped. "Dr. Martinez." Jessica appeared in the doorway of the consultation room, her expression puzzled. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course." "Excuse me, Mike," Sarah said, stepping into the hallway. "That man I mentioned yesterday? He's back. Same spot in the lobby, same quiet demeanor. But this time, I saw him talking to one of the families, the Johnsons, whose daughter Katie is in the general pediatrics ward. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet conversation. Mrs. Johnson looked surprised at first. Then she started smiling. Sarah felt her curiosity intensify. How long has he been there? About an hour. And here's the thing. I asked Maria at the information desk if she knew anything, and she said he comes in every few days, usually mid-morning, never stays more than a couple hours, never asks for anything, never causes any disruption, just observes. Every few days. How long has this been going on? According to Maria, about 3 months. She said she finally recognized him last week and was debating whether to mention it to security, but he's never done anything concerning. Just sits, sometimes talks quietly with families and leaves. This information transformed Sarah's mild curiosity into genuine interest. 3 months of quiet, regular visits suggested something more purposeful than casual observation. "I think I need to see this for myself." "That's what I was hoping you'd say." "Want to take a walk down to the lobby?" They took the elevator down, Sarah's mind racing with possibilities. The lobby of Cincinnati Children's Hospital was designed to be welcoming and calming, with soft colors, natural light, and a small play area where mobile patients and their siblings could spend time outside the clinical environment. It was often filled with anxious parents, siblings trying to stay entertained, and the occasional therapy dog making rounds. As they emerged from the elevator, Jessica discreetly pointed toward the seating area near the large windows facing the street. There, in the blue sweater. Sarah followed her gaze and immediately understood why Jessica had been so certain of the identification. Even at 73 years old, even dressed down and clearly trying to avoid attention, Pete Rose's distinctive features were unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up in Cincinnati. He sat in one of the cushioned chairs, a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, but his posture was alert and engaged as he watched the activity in the play area. What struck Sarah most was his expression. This wasn't the cocky confidence of Charlie Hustle that had defined his playing career, nor the defensive posture he'd adopted during his gambling controversies. Instead, there was something almost vulnerable about the way he sat there, as if he was working up the courage for something important. "Has he noticed us watching?" Sarah asked quietly. "I don't think so. He seems pretty focused on the families over there." As if summoned by their conversation, Rose stood up slowly, his movements showing the careful deliberation of someone whose body had endured decades of professional athletics. Instead of heading for the exit, as Sarah expected, he walked toward the play area where a young boy, perhaps 6 years old, was struggling to reach a toy on a higher shelf. They watched as Rose approached the child. Sarah recognized him as Jamie Patterson, who was recovering from appendix surgery, and quietly helped him reach the toy. The interaction lasted only a minute or two, but Sarah could see the child's face light up with gratitude. Rose said something that made Jamie laugh, ruffled his hair gently, and then returned to his seat. "Did you see that?" Jessica whispered. "I saw it, but I'm not sure I understand it." Their observation was interrupted by Rosa Rodriguez, who appeared at Sarah's elbow, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafe. "Dr. Martinez? I was hoping I might find you. I wanted to ask about Emma's appetite." As Sarah turned to address Rosa's concerns, she lost sight of Rose in the lobby. By the time she'd finished discussing Emma's treatment schedule and nutritional needs, the mysterious visitor had disappeared. "He left while you were talking to Mrs. Rodriguez," Jessica reported. "Just walked out the main entrance. No fanfare, no acknowledgement from anyone." The encounter left Sarah with more questions than answers, but she filed the mystery away as she returned to the more immediate concerns of patient care. Emma's second treatment session was scheduled for that afternoon, and Marcus Williams was due for another round of scans that would help determine his surgical options. Emma's treatment proceeded smoothly, with Miguel once again serving as her steadfast companion and Rosa providing the quiet strength that seemed to anchor the entire family. As the chemotherapy drip slowly delivered its life-saving poison, Emma dozed fitfully while Miguel worked on his homework at the small table by the window. "Miguel," Sarah said softly, pulling up a chair beside the 7-year-old. "How are you doing with all of this?" I know it's a lot for someone your age to handle. Miguel looked up from his math worksheet, his young face serious. I'm okay, Dr. Martinez. Mama says I'm being very brave and that Emma needs me to be strong for her. Your mama's right. But it's also okay if you feel scared or sad sometimes. Being brave doesn't mean you never feel worried. Sometimes I have bad dreams, Miguel admitted quietly, glancing toward his sleeping sister. Dreams where Emma doesn't get better and Mama cries all the time, and I don't know how to help. Sarah felt her heart constrict. 7 years old, and he was already carrying burdens that would challenge adults. Miguel, those feelings are completely normal. Would it help to talk to someone about those dreams? We have counselors here who are really good at helping kids work through scary feelings. Maybe, he said, then added with startling insight, but I think what would help most is if Emma gets better. We're working very hard to make that happen, Miguel. And having you here, reading to her and being her big brother, that's actually part of her getting better too. As if responding to their conversation, Emma stirred and opened her eyes. Miguel, are you still here? I'm always here, pequeña, he replied, immediately setting aside his homework. Do you want me to read more about Charlotte and Wilbur? Yes, please, but first, can you ask Dr. Martinez if the man in the baseball cap might come visit us? Sarah and Miguel both looked at Emma with confusion. What man, sweetheart? The nice man who was talking to Jamie in the playroom. He looked sad, but in a good way, like how Mama looks when she watches us sleep. Jamie said he helped him get his toy and told him a funny story about baseball. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Emma, when did you see this man? This morning, when you took me to walk around the halls. He was sitting by the big windows, and when he saw me with my IV pole, he smiled and waved, but he looked like he wanted to say something and couldn't figure out how. The image Emma described perfectly matched Sarah's own observations of Pete Rose in the lobby, but what struck her most was Emma's intuitive understanding of his demeanor, that he looked like he wanted to connect but wasn't sure how to bridge the gap. Did he seem scary to you, Emma? Oh no, not scary at all. He seemed lonely, like he needed a friend. From the mouth of babes, Sarah thought, 5-year-old Emma, facing her own monumental challenges, had immediately recognized something that the adults around her were still trying to understand. The afternoon brought Marcus Williams' scan results, and Sarah found herself delivering news that was both encouraging and complicated. The tumor hadn't grown, which was excellent, but its position meant that surgical intervention would be more complex than they'd initially hoped. So, what does that mean exactly? Marcus asked, his laptop closed for once as he focused entirely on the conversation. It means we have options, but they're all going to require careful consideration, Sarah explained. The good news is that the chemotherapy is working. The tumor hasn't grown at all in the past month. The challenging news is that if we do decide surgery is the best option, it will be more involved than we initially thought. Patricia Williams leaned forward in her chair. More involved how? The tumor's position means we'd need to work around some important structures in your leg. It's definitely doable, but the recovery time would be longer, and we'd need to think carefully about the best approach for maintaining as much function as possible. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the thoughtful maturity that continued to impress Sarah. Dr. Martinez, what would you do if I were your son? It was a question Sarah heard regularly, and one that never got easier to answer. Marcus, if you were my son, I would want to make sure we explored every option thoroughly before making any decisions. I'd want to get second opinions from specialists. I'd want to understand all the risks and benefits, and I'd want to make sure that whatever we decided aligned with your goals for your life. My goals have kind of changed, Marcus admitted. 6 months ago, my biggest worry was whether I'd get a basketball scholarship to UK or UOFL. Now I'm just hoping I'll be able to walk normally. And both of those concerns are valid, Sarah replied. But Marcus, I've seen teenagers recover from situations that seemed impossible and go on to achieve things that surprised everyone, including their doctors. I've also seen young people discover strengths and passions they never knew they had because they were forced to explore different paths. Are you saying I should give up on basketball? I'm saying that basketball might look different for you than it did before, but that doesn't mean your athletic life has to be over. Have you ever heard of Paralympic sports or adaptive athletics programs? Marcus shook his head, but Sarah could see his interest piqued. There are incredible athletes who've overcome challenges similar to yours and found ways to compete at the highest levels. I'm not saying that's definitely your path, but I am saying that having this diagnosis doesn't mean your dreams have to end. They might just evolve. Ew. As Sarah left Marcus's room, she found herself thinking about Emma's observation of the man in the baseball cap. There was something poetic about the idea that Pete Rose, a man whose own dreams had evolved in unexpected and sometimes painful ways, might be drawn to a place where children were learning to redefine their own futures. The evening brought the usual shift change, but as Sarah prepared to leave, Jessica approached her again. "You're not going to believe this, but I have more information about our mysterious visitor." "I'm listening." "I talked to Katie Johnson's mom. She's the family I saw him talking to yesterday. Turns out he didn't introduce himself or make a big deal about who he was. He just struck up a conversation about her daughter's drawings. Katie's been sketching the view from her hospital window, and apparently he spent 20 minutes looking at her artwork and asking thoughtful questions about her technique. That's surprisingly sweet. But here's the really interesting part. Mrs. Johnson said he told Katie that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the most difficult experiences, and that learning to see beauty in hard times was a skill that would serve her well throughout her life. Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of Rose's presence at the hospital. This wasn't casual observation or idle curiosity. This sounded like someone who understood something about finding meaning in adversity, about the long journey of making peace with disappointment and discovering new sources of purpose. "Jessica, I think I want to be in the lobby tomorrow morning." "You want to talk to him?" "I think I want to understand what he's doing here. And more importantly, I think some of our patients might benefit from understanding it too." As Sarah drove home through the darkening Cincinnati streets, she found herself thinking about the different ways people process difficult experiences. Marcus Williams was asking direct questions about his future, facing his fears with remarkable courage. Emma Rodriguez was finding strength through family love and childhood resilience. Tommy Chen was focusing on the immediate goals of recovery and maintaining connection with his normal life. And Pete Rose, apparently, was finding some form of peace or purpose by quietly observing and occasionally connecting with families facing their own challenges. There was something both mysterious and deeply human about his regular unannounced visits to the pediatric ward. The next morning would bring new developments in this unfolding story, though Sarah couldn't have predicted how Rose's quiet presence would soon become a catalyst for healing that extended far beyond the medical treatment her patients were receiving. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful medicine came from unexpected sources, and the most meaningful connections happened without fanfare or recognition. Thursday morning brought unseasonably warm weather to Cincinnati, the kind of Indian summer day that made October feel like a gift rather than a prelude to winter. Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived at the hospital with a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain, her conversation with Jessica from the previous evening still occupying her thoughts. She completed her morning rounds with perhaps more efficiency than usual, eager to position herself in the lobby by mid-morning when their mysterious visitor typically arrived. Tommy Chen's continued improvement was heartening. His appetite had returned with a vengeance, and he was already asking about when he could return to school. Emma Rodriguez was tolerating her treatment protocol better than expected, though the fatigue was beginning to show in her increasingly frequent naps. Marcus Williams presented a more complex picture. His scan results had prompted consultations with orthopedic oncology specialists at both Cincinnati Children's and the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. While the options were becoming clearer, the decisions were becoming more difficult. "Dr. Martinez," Marcus said as she reviewed his chart, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about Paralympic sports and adaptive athletics." "Oh, what kind of thinking?" "I looked up some videos online last night. There's this guy, Blake Leaper, who runs track with prosthetic legs, and there are wheelchair basketball leagues that are incredibly competitive." Marcus paused, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not saying I'm ready to think about prosthetics or anything like that, but it was good to see that there are options I hadn't considered." Patricia Williams looked up from her morning crossword puzzle, hope and anxiety warring in her expression. "Sweetie, let's not get ahead of ourselves." "Mom, I'm not getting ahead of myself. I'm just expanding my definition of what's possible." Marcus turned back to Sarah. "Dr. Martinez, would it be okay if I talk to someone who's been through this? Not necessarily someone with the exact same diagnosis, but someone who's had to rethink their athletic goals because of a medical situation." "I think that's a wonderful idea, Marcus. Let me see what I can arrange." As Sarah made a note to contact the hospital's peer support network, she was struck by the maturity of Marcus's approach. Rather than dwelling on what he might lose, he was actively exploring what might still be possible. It was exactly the kind of mindset that often predicted positive outcomes, regardless of the medical challenges involved. By 10:15 a.m., Sarah had positioned herself in the lobby with a cup of coffee and a stack of patient files to review. To anyone observing, she appeared to be conducting routine administrative work, but her attention was focused on the seating area near the main windows. At 10:32 a.m., Pete Rose entered through the main entrance. Sarah watched as he moved through the lobby, with practiced discretion, nodding politely to the information desk staff, but clearly aiming to avoid drawing attention to himself. He wore dark jeans, a plain grey sweater, and the same worn baseball cap she'd observed before, pulled low enough to shadow his distinctive features without completely obscuring his face. What struck her most was his demeanor. There was none of the swagger that had characterized his playing career, none of the defensive posture that had marked his public appearances during his gambling controversies. Instead, he moved with the careful humility of someone who had learned hard lessons about the consequences of public attention. Rose settled into his usual chair and began his quiet observation of the hospital's morning rhythm. Sarah watched as his gaze followed a young father pushing his daughter in a wheelchair toward the elevator, as he observed an elderly grandmother reading to twin boys in the play area, as his attention lingered on a teenage patient walking slowly with a physical therapist through the main corridor. After about 20 minutes, Rose stood and approached a woman who was sitting alone near the children's book corner, tears streaming silently down her face. Sarah recognized her as Angela Foster, whose 9-year-old son David was scheduled for a complex cardiac procedure later that week. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation from across the lobby, but she could observe the interaction. Rose sat down beside Angela, not touching her but maintaining a respectful proximity that suggested comfort rather than intrusion. He spoke quietly, and after a few moments, Angela began to respond. Her tears gradually stopped, and Sarah could see her posture begin to relax. The conversation lasted perhaps 15 minutes, and when Rose stood to leave, Angela reached out and briefly touched his arm in what appeared to be gratitude. He nodded, said something that made her smile slightly, and returned to his chair. Sarah made a decision that would alter the course of the morning. She gathered her files, walked across the lobby, and approached Rose directly. "Excuse me," she said quietly, settling into the chair that Angela Foster had vacated. "I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez, from Pediatric Oncology upstairs. I was wondering if I could speak with you for a moment." Rose looked up, and Sarah saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, not of her personally, but of the type of conversation that might be coming. His expression was neither defensive nor welcoming, but simply alert. "I know who you are," she continued, "and I've been observing your visits here over the past few days. I'm curious about what brings you to our hospital so regularly." Rose was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving back to the activity in the lobby, before returning to Sarah. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had expected, with none of the brash confidence she remembered from his playing days. "Doctor, I'm not here to cause any trouble or to draw attention to myself. I hope I haven't been disruptive." "Not at all. Actually, quite the opposite. I've heard from several families that you've had brief, positive interactions with them. I'm more curious about your motivation." Rose's hands fidgeted with the brim of his baseball cap, a gesture that struck Sarah as unexpectedly vulnerable. "Doctor, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. Big ones, public ones, mistakes that hurt people I cared about and disappointed fans who believed in me." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "A few months ago, my grandson was in the hospital, not here, but in Las Vegas, where my daughter lives. Different situation, he's fine now. But being in that environment, seeing all those families dealing with things that make my problems look pretty small, it gave me some perspective." Sarah waited, sensing that there was more to come. "I started thinking about legacy, about what I want to be remembered for. And I realized that all the arguing about Hall of Fame inductions and gambling bans and who was right or wrong about what, none of that matters to these families. But maybe, just maybe, I could find small ways to be helpful. And so you come here." "I come here because these kids and their families are dealing with real challenges, life and death stuff. And sometimes just having someone sit with you for a few minutes, someone who understands that life can knock you down in ways you never expected, sometimes that helps." Sarah was struck by the honesty of his response. "What do you mean when you say you understand being knocked down?" Rose was quiet again, his gaze returning to the lobby activity. Doctor, I spent most of my adult life believing that if you worked hard enough, if you wanted something badly enough, if you never gave up, you could overcome anything. And for a long time, that seemed to be true. I had a career that exceeded my wildest dreams. But then I made choices that proved I was human after all, choices that cost me everything I thought defined me. And I learned that sometimes, no matter how hard you fight, no matter how much you want to fix something, there are consequences you have to live with. He gestured toward the families scattered throughout the lobby. These people are learning the same lesson, but through no fault of their own. Their children are facing battles that can't be won through effort or determination alone. And I guess I relate to feeling powerless in the face of something bigger than yourself. Sarah found herself moved by the raw honesty of his admission. So you come here to listen, mostly, to sit with people who are scared or angry or heartbroken and let them know they're not alone in feeling that way. I'm not trying to fix anything or offer false hope, I'm just present. The woman you were just talking to, Angela Foster, her son is having heart surgery next week. She told me. She's terrified, which is completely understandable. I told her about watching my grandson go through his procedure, how the waiting was almost harder than anything else, and how the medical team here has a reputation for being extraordinary. Sarah studied Rose's face, seeing none of the artifice or calculation she might have expected from a public figure engaged in image rehabilitation. Instead, she saw someone who had genuinely found meaning in offering comfort to strangers facing their worst fears. Mr. Rose, would you be interested in meeting some of my patients? Not as Pete Rose, the baseball player, but as someone who understands something about resilience and finding new definitions of success? Rose looked surprised by the suggestion. I don't know, Doctor. I wouldn't want to intrude, and I'm not sure what I'd have to offer kids dealing with serious medical issues. I think you might be surprised. I have a 15-year-old patient, Marcus Williams, who's facing some difficult decisions about his future. He's been a basketball player his whole life, and now he's having to consider that his athletic career might look very different than he planned. Cancer. Osteosarcoma, bone cancer in his leg. We're still determining the best treatment approach, but he's been asking thoughtful questions about adapting to new realities. Rose considered this. What makes you think I could help him? Because you understand something about having to redefine yourself when the identity you've built your whole life around gets challenged. Marcus is incredibly mature for his age, but he's struggling with the idea that his dreams might need to evolve. And you think my experience with falling from grace might be relevant? I think your experience with resilience might be relevant. The fact that you're here, finding new ways to contribute and connect with people, suggests you've learned something valuable about rebuilding after loss. Rose was quiet for several minutes, watching a young girl navigate the lobby with her IV pole while her parents stayed close beside her. Doctor, if you really think it might help, I'd be willing to meet with him. But I want to be clear. I'm not here to rehabilitate my image or to get positive publicity. If this is going to help Marcus, it has to be genuine. I believe it would be genuine, and Marcus is the kind of young man who would see right through anything that wasn't. When were you thinking? Would this afternoon work? He has some free time between his physical therapy session and dinner. I'll be here. As Rose stood to leave, Sarah felt compelled to ask one more question. Mr. Rose, what do you hope to accomplish with these visits? What are you looking for here? He paused, considering the question seriously. Doctor, I spent most of my career focused on individual statistics and personal achievements. Hits, runs, records, all things that were about me succeeding, often at the expense of others. He gestured toward the hospital around them. Here, success looks completely different. It's about families supporting each other, medical teams working together, kids finding courage they didn't know they had. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself, even when you're facing your own challenges. And that appeals to you? It teaches me something I never learned as a player. That sometimes the most important victories are the ones that don't get recorded in any official statistics. After Rose left, Sarah remained in the lobby for a few more minutes, processing their conversation. She had expected to encounter either the brash confidence of Charlie Hustle or the defensive posturing of someone trying to rehabilitate a damaged reputation. Instead, she had found someone who seemed genuinely committed to understanding and contributing to the experiences of families facing medical crises. The afternoon brought a flurry of activity as Sarah arranged the meeting between Rose and Marcus Williams. She spoke with Patricia Williams first, explaining the situation carefully and ensuring that both she and Marcus were comfortable with the visit. "Mum, are you serious?" Marcus asked when Sarah explained the opportunity. "Pete Rose wants to meet with me. He wants to meet with you, but not necessarily as Pete Rose, the famous baseball player. More as someone who understands something about having to adapt when life doesn't go according to plan." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Does he know about my situation? He knows you're facing some difficult decisions about your athletic future, and he understands what it's like to have your relationship with sports become complicated." "I'd like to meet him," Marcus said decisively. "I mean Pete Rose, Charlie Hustle. He's a legend, regardless of everything else that happened." Patricia Williams had concerns. "Sarah, I don't want Marcus getting false hope or unrealistic expectations from someone who's dealing with his own issues." "Mrs. Williams, I understand your concern, but I think Mr. Rose might offer Marcus something valuable. Not false hope, but perspective on how to find meaning and purpose, even when your original plans get derailed." When Rose returned that afternoon, he carried himself with the same quiet discretion Sarah had observed before. She met him in the lobby and escorted him to Marcus's room, briefing him on the way about Marcus's personality and current medical situation. "He's remarkably mature for 15, but he's still a teenager dealing with some very adult fears," Sarah explained as they walked. "He's been the star of his basketball team since middle school, and athletics have been central to his identity." "I understand," Rose replied. "Doctor, I want to be helpful, but I also don't want to overstep. How do you think I should approach this?" "Just be honest about your own experience." Marcus responds well to authenticity, and he's smart enough to recognize when someone is trying to sugarcoat difficult realities. They reached Marcus's room to find him sitting up in bed, his laptop closed, and his attention focused entirely on the doorway. Patricia Williams sat in her usual chair, her expression cautious but curious. "Marcus," Sarah said, "I'd like you to meet Pete Rose." Rose stepped forward, extending his hand with none of the flourish Sarah might have expected from a celebrity encounter. "Marcus, it's good to meet you. Dr. Martinez tells me you're dealing with some tough decisions about your future." "Mr. Rose, it's an honor to meet you," Marcus replied, shaking hands with obvious awe but also surprising composure. "I know about your records and what you meant to Cincinnati baseball." "Thank you, Marcus. But I'm not here to talk about my playing career. I'm here because Dr. Martinez thought I might understand something about what you're going through." "What do you mean?" Rose pulled up a chair beside Marcus's bed, his movements deliberate and respectful. "Marcus, have you ever had something that you thought defined who you were completely, something so central to your identity that you couldn't imagine yourself without it?" "Basketball," Marcus answered immediately. "Since I was 7 years old, everything I've worked for, everything I've dreamed about, has been related to basketball. And now that relationship with basketball is being challenged. Yeah, Dr. Martinez says we don't know yet exactly what my treatment will look like, but there's a good chance I'll never play competitively again, at least not the way I always imagined." Rose nodded. "Marcus, I spent 24 years as a professional baseball player. Baseball wasn't just my job, it was who I was. Pete Rose was synonymous with Charlie Hustle, with diving headfirst into bases, with playing the game harder than anyone else. And then I made choices that ended that identity permanently, not because of injury or illness, like what you're facing, but because of my own poor judgment. The point is, I had to learn how to be Pete Rose without being Pete Rose, the baseball player." Marcus leaned forward, clearly engaged. "How did you do that?" "Honestly, not very well for a long time. I spent years being angry and bitter and focused on what I had lost instead of what I might still be able to contribute. But something changed. Something changed when I realized that the qualities that made me successful in baseball, determination, resilience, the ability to get back up after being knocked down, those qualities didn't disappear when my playing career ended. They just needed to be applied differently." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Mr. Rose, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever miss it so much that it physically hurts?" Rose's expression grew more serious. "Every day, Marcus, every single day. The smell of grass, the sound of the crowd, the feeling of getting a clutch hit. Those memories are part of who I am, and losing access to that world felt like losing a piece of my soul." "So how do you deal with that?" "I've learned that missing something doesn't mean you have to be defined by its absence. I still love baseball. I still follow the game. I still have those memories and experiences that nobody can take away from me. But I've also discovered that there are other ways to find purpose and meaning. Patricia Williams, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Mr. Rose, what would you say to a mother who's watching her son struggle with the idea that his dreams might need to change? Rose turned to address her directly. Mrs. Williams, I'd say that Marcus is lucky to have a mother who's willing to support him through this transition, whatever it looks like. And I'd say that the qualities that made him successful in basketball, his work ethic, his competitiveness, his ability to handle pressure, those are going to serve him well in whatever direction his life takes. He turned back to Marcus. Marcus, have you thought about what aspects of basketball you love most? What do you mean? I mean, is it the physical competition, the teamwork, the strategy, the feeling of improving your skills, the connection with teammates and coaches? Marcus considered this carefully. All of those things, I guess, but maybe mostly the feeling of being part of something bigger than myself and the satisfaction of getting better at something through hard work. Marcus, those needs don't disappear because your relationship with basketball changes. There are dozens of ways to experience teamwork, competition, skill development, and being part of something meaningful. Like what? Well, Dr. Martinez mentioned something about Paralympic sports and adaptive athletics. But beyond that, there are coaching opportunities, sports management, athletic training, sports medicine, sports psychology. There are ways to stay connected to athletics that might not have occurred to you yet. Have you found ways to stay connected to baseball? I have, though it took me longer than it should have. I do some coaching with young players. I've been involved in baseball camps for kids who can't afford regular instruction, and I've discovered that watching other people develop their skills can be almost as satisfying as developing your own. Marcus looked thoughtful. Mr. Rose, can I tell you something that I'm worried about? Absolutely. I'm worried that if I can't play basketball the way I always planned, I won't know who I am anymore. Like, if I'm not Marcus, the basketball player, then who am I? Rose was quiet for a long moment before responding. Marcus, that's exactly the right question to be asking. And the fact that you're asking it shows a level of self-awareness that's going to serve you well. But how do I answer it? By discovering all the other things you are besides a basketball player. You're obviously intelligent, thoughtful, articulate. You're brave enough to ask difficult questions and face uncertain futures. You're someone who inspires respect from medical professionals and concern from people who care about you. Rose gestured toward Patricia. You're a son who has a mother who would do anything for you. You're a student, a friend, a young man with interests and talents that exist completely independent of your ability to put a ball through a hoop. But basketball has been such a big part of my identity. And it always will be. But Marcus, identity isn't just about what you do. It's about who you are when you're doing it. The character traits that made you successful in basketball, those are part of your identity in ways that no medical diagnosis can touch. Their conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering topics that ranged from the practical challenges of medical treatment to the philosophical questions of how to maintain hope in the face of uncertainty. Sarah observed the interaction with growing appreciation for Rose's ability to connect with Marcus on a level that was both honest about difficulties and genuinely encouraging about possibilities. As the visit concluded, Marcus extended his hand again to Rose. Mr. Rose, thank you for being so honest with me. It helps to talk to someone who understands what it's like to have your relationship with sports become complicated. Marcus, I hope you'll keep me updated on how you're doing, and I hope you'll remember that having to change directions doesn't mean you're giving up on excellence. It just means you're applying it somewhere new. As Rose prepared to leave, Patricia Williams approached him. Mr. Rose, I can't thank you enough. Marcus has been struggling with a lot of anger and fear about his diagnosis, and this is the first time I've seen him talk about his future with anything resembling optimism. Mrs. Williams, Marcus is going to be fine, regardless of what his medical treatment looks like. He's got the right combination of intelligence, determination, and support to handle whatever comes next. After Rose left, Sarah spent a few more minutes with Marcus, checking in on how he was processing the conversation. Dr. Martinez, that was incredible, Marcus said. I mean, I knew Pete Rose was a legend, but I had no idea he would be so real, so honest about his own struggles. What was most helpful about the conversation for you? I think it was hearing him say that the things that made him successful in baseball didn't disappear when his baseball career ended. I've been so focused on losing basketball that I hadn't thought about what I might still have. And what do you think you still have? I don't know exactly yet, but I'm starting to think that maybe I'm more than just a basketball player, and maybe that's not a bad thing to discover. As Sarah completed her evening rounds, she reflected on the unexpected developments of the day. Pete Rose's quiet presence at the hospital had evolved from curious mystery to meaningful intervention, and his willingness to share his own experiences with identity and resilience had provided Marcus with a perspective that no medical team could offer. The evening found her thinking about the different forms that healing could take. Marcus's medical treatment would continue according to established protocols, but his conversation with Rose had addressed psychological and emotional needs that were equally crucial to his recovery. Sometimes, she realized, the most powerful medicine came from unexpected sources and took forms that couldn't be measured or prescribed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for connection, but tonight, Marcus Williams would fall asleep thinking about possibilities rather than limitations, and Pete Rose would return home knowing that his presence had made a genuine difference in a young man's life. It was the kind of victory that would never appear in any record book, but it was perhaps more meaningful than any that had come before. Friday morning brought news that would reshape the trajectory of multiple lives within Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived to find Tommy Chen's room buzzing with excitement. His latest blood work showed improvements that exceeded even their most optimistic projections, and Dr. Peterson had cleared him to return home by early next week. "Dr. Martinez!" Tommy called out as she entered the room, his face bright with joy. "Mama says I can go back to school next month." Lin Chen looked up from packing Tommy's belongings, tears of relief streaming down her face. "Doctor, we cannot thank you enough. When we first came here, we were so scared we didn't understand the language, the procedures, everything seemed impossible. Tommy's recovery is the result of his own strength and your family's dedication," Sarah replied, checking his latest lab results. "But I have to ask, are you ready to go home? Sometimes patients get a little nervous about leaving the hospital environment." "I'm ready," Tommy said confidently. "But Dr. Martinez, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Yesterday, when I was walking to the playroom, I saw a man talking to Marcus in his room. Nurse Jessica said it was Pete Rose, the baseball player. Is that true?" "It is true. Mr. Rose has been visiting the hospital, and he spent some time talking with Marcus about dealing with challenges and finding new directions in life." Tommy's eyes widened. "Could I meet him before I go home? I don't know much about baseball, but Daddy says Pete Rose is very famous, and I wanted to thank him for being nice to Marcus." Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of Rose's impact on the hospital community. Tommy's desire to meet him wasn't about celebrity worship. It was about recognizing kindness and wanting to express gratitude. "Tommy, I'll see what I can arrange." The morning rounds continued with Emma Rodriguez, whose treatment was progressing well despite the inevitable fatigue and nausea that accompanied chemotherapy. Miguel sat in his usual spot, working on a new drawing while Emma dozed fitfully. "Miguel, that's beautiful artwork," Sarah said, examining his latest creation, a detailed drawing of the hospital lobby with families sitting together, reading and talking. "You've really captured the feeling of this place." "I like to draw what I see," Miguel replied seriously. "Yesterday I saw the nice man who talked to Marcus, and he was also talking to a lady who was crying. He made her feel better. You saw Mr. Rose talking to another family." "See. The lady was very sad, but after they talked, she wasn't crying anymore, and when Emma and I walked by later, she smiled at us." Sarah realized that Rose's interactions were creating ripple effects throughout the hospital community that extended far beyond the individual conversations she had witnessed. Children were observing acts of kindness and learning lessons about compassion and support that would stay with them long after their medical treatment ended. "Miguel, what did you think about seeing someone help a stranger who was sad? I thought it was what Mama always tells us to do, to help people when they need help, even if we don't know them." "That's exactly right. And Miguel, you and Emma help people here too, just by being brave and kind to the other families." The most significant developments of the morning came from Marcus Williams' room. Sarah found him engaged in an animated phone conversation, his laptop open to what appeared to be research about adaptive sports programs. "That sounds incredible," Marcus was saying into the phone. "And you really think I'd be eligible for the program even before my treatment is completely finished?" Patricia Williams looked up from her crossword puzzle, her expression a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. Marcus concluded his call and turned to Sarah with more energy than she'd seen from him since his diagnosis. "Dr. Martinez, you're not going to believe this. I've been researching the adaptive athletics programs you mentioned, and I found this organization called Challenged Athletes Foundation that provides grants and support for athletes with disabilities." "That's wonderful, Marcus. What did you learn?" "They have this program called Operation Rebound that specifically helps athletes who've acquired disabilities through injury or illness. And get this, they don't just provide equipment and funding, they provide mentorship from other athletes who've been through similar experiences." Patricia set down her crossword puzzle, giving Marcus her full attention. "But here's the really amazing part," Marcus continued. "I called them this morning, and the person I talked to said that some of their most successful athletes started training and competing while they were still receiving medical treatment. She said that having athletic goals can actually improve recovery outcomes." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. "Marcus, that's incredible news. What kind of sports were they talking about?" "All kinds. Wheelchair basketball, obviously, but also track and field, swimming, skiing, cycling, and Dr. Martinez, some of these athletes compete at levels that are honestly more impressive than anything I ever achieved in regular basketball." "What's the next step?" "They're sending me information packets, and they have a representative in Ohio who wants to set up a phone call with me next week. They also gave me contact information for 3 athletes in the Cincinnati area who've been through similar medical situations." Patricia Williams spoke up for the first time. "Marcus, this sounds wonderful, but let's make sure we're not getting ahead of ourselves. We still don't know exactly what your treatment is going to look like." "Mom, I know we need to focus on the medical stuff first, but having these conversations, thinking about future possibilities, it makes everything feel less scary." Sarah reviewed Marcus's latest scan results. "Marcus, I actually have some good news about your treatment options. The tumor hasn't grown at all in the past 2 weeks, which means the chemotherapy is working exactly as we hoped, and we've gotten additional opinions from specialists that suggest we might have more surgical options than we initially thought." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that while surgery is still going to be complex, we're increasingly confident that we can remove the tumor while preserving more function in your leg than we originally anticipated." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Dr. Martinez, regardless of how the surgery turns out, I want to pursue these adaptive athletics programs. Meeting with Mr. Rose yesterday made me realize that I don't want to define myself by my limitations. I want to define myself by what I'm able to achieve despite them." "Marcus, that attitude is going to serve you incredibly well, both medically and personally." "Yay." As Sarah left Marcus's room, she was struck by the transformation in his demeanor and outlook. Pete Rose's visit had catalyzed something that went beyond simple encouragement. It had sparked a fundamental shift in how Marcus understood his identity and his possibilities. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when Rose appeared in the hospital lobby earlier than usual, carrying a small wrapped package. Sarah was reviewing patient files at the nurse's station when Jessica alerted her to his presence. "He's been here about 15 minutes, Jessica reported, and he's talking with the Chen family. Tommy is being discharged today, and apparently he specifically asked to meet Mr. Rose before leaving." Sarah made her way to the lobby to observe the interaction. Tommy sat in a wheelchair, hospital protocol for discharge, while his parents stood nearby with his discharge paperwork and a small suitcase. Rose knelt beside Tommy's wheelchair, the wrapped package in his hands. "Tommy," Rose was saying, "Dr. Martinez tells me you're going home today, which is fantastic news." "Thank you, Mr. Rose. I wanted to meet you because Nurse Jessica told me you've been helping families here, and I think that's very nice." "Well, Tommy, I think you've been helping families here too, just by being brave and kind during your treatment." "Mr. Rose, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you come here? I mean, you're famous, so you could probably go anywhere you want." Rose paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "Tommy, that's a really good question. I come here because I've learned that the most important things in life aren't about being famous or having people know your name. They're about finding ways to help other people, especially when they're going through difficult times. Like how the doctors and nurses help us? Exactly like that. Everyone finds different ways to help. Doctors and nurses use their medical training. I just try to use my experience with facing challenges and disappointments." Rose handed Tommy the wrapped package. "This is something I wanted you to have." Tommy carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a baseball, but not just any baseball. It was clearly well used, with grass stains and scuff marks that told the story of actual gameplay. "Tommy, this is a baseball from my last game as a professional player. I've kept it for 35 years, and I want you to have it." Tommy's eyes widened as he turned the baseball over in his small hands. "Mr. Rose, this is from your last game ever." "It is. And Tommy, I want you to keep it as a reminder that endings can also be beginnings. My playing career ended that day, but I've discovered lots of other ways to stay connected to the things I love." Lin Chen stepped forward, her eyes filling with tears. "Mr. Rose, this is too generous. We cannot accept something so valuable." "Mrs. Chen, it's not valuable because of what it's worth to a collector. It's valuable because of what it represents. The idea that we can find new meanings and new purposes even when one chapter of our lives ends." David Chen extended his hand to Rose. "Mr. Rose, our family will never forget your kindness. Tommy will treasure this gift." "Mr. Chen, your family's courage and strength during Tommy's treatment has been inspiring to watch. I hope Tommy never needs this reminder. But if he ever faces difficult times in the future, I hope he'll remember that challenges can be overcome and that new opportunities can emerge from setbacks." As the Chen family prepared to leave, Tommy looked up at Rose from his wheelchair. "Mr. Rose, will you still come to the hospital after I'm gone?" "I will, Tommy. There are other families here who might benefit from having someone to talk to." "Good. I think the other kids would like to meet you, too." After the Chens left, Sarah approached Rose in the lobby. "That was an incredibly generous gesture. Tommy's a special kid. His whole family is remarkable. I wanted him to have something that represented the idea that difficult experiences can lead to unexpected opportunities." "Mr. Rose, I have to ask, was that really a baseball from your last professional game?" Rose smiled, and for a moment, Sarah caught a glimpse of the confidence that had defined Charlie Hustle. "Dr. Martinez, that baseball has more significance to me than any record or statistic from my career. It represents the end of one identity and the beginning of a journey to discover new ones. And you're comfortable giving that away?" "Dr. Martinez, I'm 73 years old. If I've learned anything, it's that the things that matter most aren't the ones you keep for yourself. They're the ones you pass on to people who can find meaning in them." Sarah found herself moved by the gesture and its underlying philosophy. "Mr. Rose, Marcus Williams has been asking if he could see you again. His outlook has changed dramatically since your conversation yesterday. I'd be happy to visit with Marcus again. How is he doing?" "Remarkably well. He's been researching adaptive athletics programs and connecting with organizations that support athletes with disabilities. Your conversation seems to have catalyzed a fundamental shift in how he's thinking about his future." "I'm glad to hear that. Marcus is a thoughtful young man with a lot to offer the world, regardless of what his medical treatment looks like. Would you be available to see him this afternoon?" "Of course." When Sarah and Rose arrived at Marcus's room, they found him on a video call with someone who appeared to be demonstrating wheelchair basketball techniques on a computer screen. Patricia Williams sat nearby, watching with obvious interest and growing understanding. "Marcus," Sarah said, "I brought someone who wanted to check in on how you're doing." Marcus looked up from his laptop with obvious excitement. "Mr. Rose, perfect timing. I've been talking to Amy Palmer. She's a Paralympic gold medalist in wheelchair basketball who lives in Columbus. Amy, I want you to meet Pete Rose." "Mr. Rose," came a voice from the laptop speakers, "it's an honor to meet you. Marcus has been telling me about your conversation yesterday, and I wanted to thank you for encouraging him to explore adaptive athletics." Rose moved closer to the laptop screen. "Ms. Palmer, it's my pleasure. Marcus is an exceptional young man, and I have no doubt he'll excel at whatever he decides to pursue. Mr. Rose, Marcus tells me you understand something about having to redefine success and find new sources of identity after setbacks. I do understand that, yes. It's not an easy process, but it can lead to discoveries about yourself that you might never have made otherwise. That's exactly what I try to tell athletes who are transitioning into adaptive sports. Marcus, would you mind if Mr. Rose and I talked for a moment?" "Not at all." Amy Palmer addressed Rose directly through the laptop screen. "Mr. Rose, as someone who's worked with hundreds of athletes making this transition, I can tell you that the most important factor in successful adaptation isn't physical ability or even access to equipment. It's mindset. And based on my conversation with Marcus today, he's already developed the kind of perspective that predicts positive outcomes." "What kind of perspective is that?" The understanding that athletic excellence isn't about the specific sport you play, it's about the dedication, discipline, and resilience you bring to whatever challenges you face. Marcus gets that now in a way that many athletes never do. Rose nodded thoughtfully. Ms. Palmer, that's exactly what I was hoping he might discover. Marcus has all the qualities that made him successful in basketball, and those qualities will serve him well regardless of how his athletic career evolves. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Amy Palmer providing specific information about training programs, equipment options, and competitive opportunities in adaptive athletics. Marcus took detailed notes, asked intelligent questions, and demonstrated a level of engagement that clearly impressed both Rose and the Paralympic athlete. After the video call ended, Marcus turned to Rose with obvious gratitude. "Mr. Rose, I can't thank you enough for helping me see possibilities instead of limitations. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be excited about wheelchair basketball, I would have thought they were crazy. Marcus, what you're discovering is that excellence and competition and the joy of athletic achievement aren't limited to any particular format. They're about pushing yourself to be the best version of yourself possible." Exactly. And Mr. Rose, Amy invited me to attend a training camp in Columbus next month. Obviously, I'll need to coordinate with my medical team, but if Dr. Martinez says it's okay, I'd love to go. Sarah reviewed Marcus's treatment schedule. "Marcus, I think that sounds like an excellent goal. It would give you something positive to work toward during your recovery, and the physical activity would likely be beneficial for your overall health." Patricia Williams, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "Mr. Rose, I have to admit, when Sarah first mentioned that you wanted to meet with Marcus, I was skeptical. I thought it might be some kind of publicity stunt or image rehabilitation effort." "I understand that concern, Mrs. Williams. But watching Marcus over the past 2 days, seeing how his entire outlook has changed, how he's gone from being depressed and angry to being excited about future possibilities, I realize you've given him something that no medical treatment could provide." "Mrs. Williams, Marcus gave himself that change in outlook. I just shared some experiences that helped him recognize possibilities he already possessed." "Well, regardless of how you want to describe it, our family is grateful." As Rose prepared to leave, Marcus stopped him with one final question. "Mr. Rose, can I ask you something that might be too personal?" "Go ahead. Do you ever regret the choices that ended your baseball career?" Rose was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Marcus, regret is a complicated emotion. Do I wish I had made different choices? Absolutely. Do I wish I could go back and change the past? Sometimes. But do I regret the journey that brought me to this moment, sitting here with you and your family, having this conversation? No, I don't regret that at all." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the mistakes I made, as painful as they were, taught me things about humility and resilience and finding new sources of meaning that I never would have learned otherwise. And those lessons have allowed me to connect with people like you in ways that might not have been possible if my life had gone according to my original plans." Marcus nodded slowly. "So sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best things." "Sometimes, Marcus. Not always and not easily, but sometimes. The key is staying open to possibilities you might never have considered before." As evening approached and Rose departed, Sarah reflected on the day's developments. Tommy Chen's discharge had been a celebration of medical success, but it had also been an opportunity for Rose to share something meaningful from his own journey. Marcus Williams' continued transformation from despair to hope demonstrated the power of perspective and possibility in the healing process. But perhaps most significantly, Sarah was beginning to see how Rose's presence was affecting the entire hospital community. Other families had observed his interactions with Tommy and Marcus, and word was spreading about the former baseball player who came to offer comfort and encouragement without fanfare or self-promotion. That evening, as Sarah completed her notes and prepared to leave for the weekend, Jessica approached her with yet another update about their mysterious visitor. "Dr. Martinez, I thought you should know. We've had 3 families specifically ask if they could meet with Mr. Rose. The word is getting around that he's been visiting and that he's really good at talking to people who are dealing with difficult situations." "What kind of families?" "Mix of situations. The Rodriguez family wants Emma to meet him because Miguel has been talking about the nice man who helps people. Mrs. Foster, the woman whose son is having heart surgery next week, asked if he might be available to talk with her husband, who's been struggling with anxiety about the procedure. And we have a new admission, 14-year-old girl with lupus, whose parents heard about Marcus's experience and thought their daughter might benefit from a similar conversation. Sarah realized that Rose's visits had evolved from personal curiosity to therapeutic intervention to something approaching an informal support program. Jessica, what do you think about setting up some kind of structured approach? Not anything official or medical, but maybe a way for families to request visits if they think it would be helpful. I think that's a great idea. Mr. Rose seems genuinely committed to being helpful, and clearly there's demand from families. Maybe we could talk to him about expanding his visits or making them more predictable. Let me think about how to approach that conversation. I want to make sure we respect his privacy and his motivations, while also maximizing the benefit to our families. As Sarah drove home through the Cincinnati evening, she found herself thinking about the unexpected ways that healing could manifest. Rose's presence at the hospital was providing something that no medical intervention could offer. The perspective of someone who had faced his own profound challenges and found ways to rebuild meaning and purpose in his life. The weekend would give her time to process the week's developments and consider how to build on the positive momentum that Rose's visits had created. Monday would bring new patients, new challenges, and new opportunities for connection and healing. But it would also bring the continuation of something that had started as a mystery and evolved into a source of hope for families facing some of life's most difficult moments. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most powerful medicine came in forms that couldn't be prescribed or measured. And sometimes the people best equipped to provide that medicine were those who had walked through their own valleys of uncertainty and emerged with hard-won wisdom about resilience and hope. Monday morning arrived with the first real chill of autumn, signaling that Cincinnati's brief reprieve from winter weather was coming to an end. Dr. Sarah Martinez walked through the hospital corridors with a sense of anticipation, wondering how Pete Rose's increasingly regular visits would continue to evolve and impact the pediatric ward community. Her first stop was Emma Rodriguez's room, where she found an unexpected scene. Emma sat in her bed, alert and engaged, while Miguel worked at the small table nearby. But instead of drawing or doing homework, Miguel was carefully writing in what appeared to be a notebook. "Good morning, Rodriguez family," Sarah said warmly. "Emma, you're looking more energetic this morning." "I feel better today, Dr. Sarah," Emma replied with a bright smile. "The medicine doesn't make me as sick as it did last week." "That's wonderful news. Your body is getting used to the treatment, which is exactly what we hoped would happen." Sarah turned to Miguel. "And what are you working on so intently over there?" Miguel looked up from his notebook, his 7-year-old face serious and thoughtful. "I'm writing a story about the hospital for my school class. My teacher said I could write about anything important that's happened to me, and I want to tell about Emma being brave and about the nice man who helps people." "The nice man?" "Mr. Pete Rose," Miguel said matter-of-factly. "He hasn't come to visit us yet, but I saw him talking to Marcus and to Tommy before Tommy went home, and I saw him help the sad lady feel better." Rosa Rodriguez looked up from her morning crossword puzzle. "Dr. Martinez, Miguel has been asking if he could meet this Mr. Rose. I don't know much about baseball, but Miguel says he's very famous and also very kind." "Miguel, what would you want to say to Mr. Rose if you met him?" Miguel considered this question with the gravity that children often bring to important matters. "I would want to thank him for being nice to the other families, and I would want to ask him if he knows any stories that might help Emma feel brave when the medicine makes her feel sick." Sarah felt moved by Miguel's thoughtfulness. At 7 years old, he was already understanding that stories and connections could be sources of healing and strength. "Miguel, I think Mr. Rose would very much like to meet both you and Emma. Let me see what I can arrange." Her next stop was Marcus Williams' room, where she found an atmosphere of focused activity. Marcus sat at his laptop, engaged in what appeared to be a video conference with multiple participants. His mother, Patricia, sat nearby, taking notes on a legal pad. Both looked up as Sarah entered. "Dr. Martinez, perfect timing," Marcus said, gesturing to his laptop screen. "I'm on a call with 3 different adaptive athletics organizations, and they're helping me coordinate training programs that could work around my treatment schedule." "That sounds incredibly promising, Marcus. How are you feeling physically today?" "Really good, actually. The pain is much more manageable, and I've been doing the physical therapy exercises you recommended. But Dr. Martinez, I wanted to talk to you about something." Marcus excused himself from his video conference and turned his full attention to Sarah. I've been thinking about Mr. Rose's visits and how much they've helped me, and I was wondering if there might be a way for other patients to benefit from similar conversations. What do you mean? I mean, there are other kids here dealing with diagnoses that are going to change their lives in major ways. And there are parents who are struggling with fear and uncertainty, just like my mom was. What if there was a more organized way for Mr. Rose to connect with families who might benefit from his perspective? Patricia Williams nodded in agreement. Marcus and I were talking about this yesterday. Mr. Rose has a gift for helping people see possibilities instead of limitations, and it seems like that gift shouldn't be limited to chance encounters. Sarah found herself impressed by Marcus's maturity and his desire to help other families benefit from his own positive experience. Marcus, that's a thoughtful and generous idea. What did you have in mind? Maybe something informal, like office hours or visiting times when families could request to meet with him if they thought it would be helpful. Not anything medical or official, just, I don't know, peer support from someone who understands what it's like to have your life plans change unexpectedly. And you think Mr. Rose would be interested in something more structured? I think he would, based on our conversations. He seems genuinely committed to being helpful, and he's told me that finding ways to contribute to other people's lives has become important to him. Sarah realized that Marcus was articulating something she'd been thinking about since her conversation with Jessica on Friday. Rose's visits had evolved from personal curiosity to meaningful intervention, and there seemed to be both demand from families and willingness from Rose to expand the program. Marcus, let me talk to Mr. Rose about this idea. I think you might be onto something that could benefit a lot of families. Her morning rounds continued with visits to several other patients, but her mind kept returning to Marcus's suggestion. By midday, she had decided to approach Rose directly about the possibility of formalizing his visits in some way. When Rose appeared in the lobby around his usual time, Sarah was waiting for him with a proposal that would change the trajectory of his involvement with the hospital. Mr. Rose, she said, approaching him near his customary seating area, I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Of course, Dr. Martinez. Is everything okay with Marcus and the other patients we've talked about? Everyone is doing well, actually, but I wanted to talk to you about expanding your visits here, if you're interested. Rose's expression grew curious but cautious. What do you mean? Over the past week, we've had multiple families specifically request to meet with you. Parents who are struggling with their children's diagnoses, teenagers who are facing major life changes because of their medical conditions, siblings who are trying to understand and support their brothers and sisters. I see. Mr. Rose, what you've been doing here, offering perspective and hope to families facing difficult circumstances, it's become a form of therapy that we can't provide through traditional medical channels. Marcus Williams suggested that we explore ways to make your visits more predictable and accessible to families who might benefit from them. Rose was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Dr. Martinez, I appreciate the confidence, but I want to be clear about my limitations. I'm not a trained counselor or therapist. I'm just someone who's made his share of mistakes and learned some things about resilience and rebuilding. And that's exactly why your perspective is so valuable. You offer something that professional counselors can't, the lived experience of someone who's had to completely redefine his identity and find new sources of meaning and purpose. What would something more formal look like? Nothing too structured. Maybe designated visiting hours once or twice a week when families could sign up to meet with you if they felt it would be helpful. Brief conversations like the ones you've been having, but with a more predictable schedule that would allow families to plan for them. Rose considered this carefully. Dr. Martinez, I'd be willing to try something like that, but I have some conditions. What kind of conditions? First, I don't want any publicity or media attention around this. If word gets out that Pete Rose is doing some kind of formal program at the hospital, it becomes about my image rehabilitation rather than about helping families. Absolutely understood. Second, I want to make sure that families understand I'm not offering medical advice or false hope. I'm just sharing experiences and perspectives that might be helpful for people dealing with difficult situations. That's exactly how we'd present it. And third, I want the flexibility to say no if I ever feel like I'm not the right person for a particular family situation. Not everyone benefits from my particular approach to dealing with setbacks. Sarah nodded, impressed by Rose's thoughtfulness and humility. Mr. Rose, those all seem like reasonable conditions. Would you be interested in starting with something small, maybe 2 hours once a week, and seeing how it develops? I think I would. But Dr. Martinez, I have one more question. What's that? How do we make sure this is actually helping people and not just making me feel better about my past mistakes? It was a question that demonstrated Rose's genuine commitment to being helpful rather than self-serving. Mr. Rose, I think the feedback from families like the Williams and the Chens provides pretty clear evidence that your conversations are making a real difference. And we could establish some simple ways to check in with families after visits to make sure the experience was positive for them. All right, Dr. Martinez, let's try it. The afternoon was spent working out the logistics of what would become known informally as Pete's office hours, 2 hours every Wednesday afternoon when Rose would be available to meet with families who requested visits. Sarah coordinated with the hospital's patient services department to establish a simple sign-up system and developed guidelines for how to present the program to families. Word of the new program spread quickly through the pediatric ward, and by Tuesday afternoon, Sarah had requests from 6 different families for Wednesday meetings with Rose. The diversity of situations represented the broad appeal of his perspective. Parents of a child with cystic fibrosis who were struggling with long-term prognosis discussions, a teenager with type 1 diabetes who was angry about lifestyle restrictions, grandparents who were trying to support their daughter and grandson through cancer treatment, and siblings of patients who felt overlooked and confused about their family's changing dynamics. Wednesday afternoon arrived with unusual anticipation throughout the pediatric ward. Rose appeared promptly at 1 p.m., carrying a small notebook and wearing the same understated clothing that had characterized his previous visits. Sarah met him in the lobby to review the afternoon's schedule and provide brief background information about each family he would be meeting. Mr. Rose, are you nervous about this more structured approach? A little, he admitted. The conversations I've had so far have been spontaneous and natural. I'm hoping that having scheduled meetings won't make them feel forced or artificial. I think you'll find that families who request these meetings are genuinely looking for the kind of perspective you can offer. The structure might actually make it easier for them to be open about their concerns. The first meeting was with the Rodriguez family. Rosa had requested time for both Miguel and Emma to meet with Rose, hoping that his stories and perspective might help both children process their experiences with Emma's treatment. Sarah escorted Rose to a small conference room that had been set up for the meetings, then brought in the Rodriguez family. Emma rode in a wheelchair, her energy still affected by the previous day's chemotherapy, while Miguel walked beside her carrying his notebook and a small gift wrapped in colorful paper. Mr. Rose, Rosa said as they entered the room. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with us. Miguel and Emma have been looking forward to this all week. It's my pleasure, Mrs. Rodriguez, and please call me Pete. Miguel stepped forward with his wrapped gift. Pete, I made something for you. Rose accepted the gift with obvious curiosity and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a hand-drawn picture of the hospital lobby. The drawing showed families sitting together, a man in a baseball cap talking to different groups of people, and children playing in the background. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping people feel better." Miguel, this is beautiful, Rose said, his voice touched with genuine emotion. You've captured something here that I didn't even realize I was part of. I like to draw what I see, Miguel replied seriously. And I see you making people less sad. Rose knelt down to Emma's wheelchair level. And Emma, how are you feeling today? I'm tired, but not too sick, Emma replied. Miguel told me you have stories about being brave when things are hard. I do have some stories like that, Emma. But first, I'd like to hear about how you've been brave during your treatment. What followed was a 45-minute conversation that demonstrated Rose's natural ability to connect with both children and adults. He listened carefully to Emma's descriptions of her treatment experiences, acknowledged Miguel's concerns about his sister and his own role in supporting her, and addressed Rosa's fears about the uncertainties ahead. Most importantly, he shared age-appropriate stories about times when he had been scared or uncertain, and how he had learned to find courage and hope even in difficult situations. He talked about the importance of family support, the value of taking things one day at a time, and the idea that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing what you needed to do, even when you were scared. Emma, he said as their time concluded, I want you to know that watching you handle your treatment with such grace and positivity has been inspiring to me. You're teaching the adults around you lessons about courage. Really? Emma asked, her eyes wide with surprise. Really, And Miguel, your dedication to supporting your sister and helping your family through this difficult time shows a level of maturity and love that not everyone possesses, even as adults. Miguel beamed with pride, and Rosa dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mrs. Rodriguez, Rose continued, your children are fortunate to have a mother who has created such a strong foundation of love and support. That foundation is going to serve them well throughout their lives, regardless of what challenges they face. As the Rodriguez family prepared to leave, Emma reached out from her wheelchair to shake Rose's hand. Pete, will we see you again? You will, Emma. I'll be here every Wednesday afternoon, and I hope you'll keep me updated on how you're doing. The subsequent meetings throughout the afternoon followed similar patterns of genuine connection and meaningful conversation. Rose met with 16-year-old Jessica Morgan, who was struggling to accept the lifestyle changes required by her type 1 diabetes diagnosis. He spent time with the grandparents of a young cancer patient, helping them understand how to provide support without overwhelming their daughter and grandson. He talked with 12-year-old Alex Chen, no relation to Tommy, whose anger about his cystic fibrosis diagnosis was affecting his relationships with family and medical staff. Each conversation demonstrated Rose's growing skill at adapting his message and approach to different ages, situations, and family dynamics. With teenagers, he was direct and honest about the challenges of identity reformation. With younger children, he focused on concepts like courage, family support, and taking things one step at a time. With parents and grandparents, he addressed the particular challenges of supporting someone you love through medical treatment while managing your own fears and uncertainties. As the afternoon concluded, Sarah checked in with Rose to assess how the structured approach had worked. How did that feel compared to your spontaneous conversations? Different, but not in a bad way, Rose replied. Having dedicated time and space for these conversations allowed for more depth, and families came prepared to talk about specific concerns. I think there are advantages to both approaches. What was most challenging about today? The variety of situations and ages. I had to adjust my communication style significantly between talking to 5-year-old Emma and 16-year-old Jessica. But that challenge also kept me engaged and thinking about how to be most helpful to each individual family. And what felt most rewarding? Rose considered this question carefully, watching families leave these conversations with a different energy than when they arrived. Not necessarily happier. Some of these situations don't have happy endings, but more hopeful, more connected to each other, more aware of their own strengths. Over the following weeks, Pete's office hours became an established and valued part of the hospital's support services. Families began requesting follow-up meetings to share progress updates and seek guidance about new challenges. Medical staff started referring families who seemed to be struggling with adaptation and acceptance issues. Word spread to other departments within the hospital, and requests came from families dealing with a wide range of pediatric medical conditions. Marcus Williams became something of an unofficial ambassador for the program, often sharing his own experience with newly diagnosed teenagers who were struggling with similar identity and future planning issues. His own recovery continued to exceed expectations, and his involvement with adaptive athletics programs provided a powerful example of how challenges could be transformed into new opportunities. Emma Rodriguez completed her chemotherapy treatment successfully, and Miguel's artwork documenting their hospital experience became the basis for a children's book about bravery and family support that Rosa eventually published to help other families facing similar challenges. Tommy Chen returned to school and normal activities, carrying with him the baseball that Pete Rose had given him and the lessons about resilience that their brief interaction had provided. But perhaps the most significant impact of Rose's evolving role at the hospital was the change in his own sense of purpose and identity. The man who had spent decades defined by statistics, records, and controversies had discovered a new form of legacy, one measured not in hits or runs, but in moments of connection, comfort, and hope shared with families facing life's greatest challenges. 6 months after his first quiet appearance in the hospital lobby, Rose reflected on the journey during a conversation with Dr. Martinez in the same conference room where he now held his weekly meetings. Dr. Martinez, when I first started coming here, I honestly wasn't sure what I was looking for. I knew I needed to find some way to contribute, some way to make peace with my past mistakes. But I didn't have a clear vision of what that would look like. And now I understand that redemption isn't about erasing the past or rehabilitating your public image. It's about finding ways to use the wisdom you've gained from your mistakes to help other people navigate their own challenges. What have you learned about yourself through these interactions? I've learned that the qualities that made me successful as an athlete, persistence, resilience, the ability to bounce back from setbacks, those qualities have value beyond sports. And I've learned that some of the most meaningful achievements in life are the ones that never get recorded in any official record. Sarah nodded, thinking about the transformation she had witnessed in both Rose and the families he had worked with. Pete, what do you hope families take away from their conversations with you? I hope they take away the understanding that difficult circumstances don't define you unless you let them. I hope they learn that identity is more flexible than most people realize, and that finding new sources of meaning and purpose is always possible, even in the face of significant challenges. And what do you take away from these conversations? Rose smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the confidence and joy that had once characterized Charlie Hustle, but tempered now with humility and wisdom. I take away the knowledge that my life experiences, all of them, including the mistakes and failures, have prepared me to offer something valuable to people who need it. I take away a sense of purpose that's based on contributing to other people's lives rather than accumulating personal achievements. That's a profound transformation. Dr. Martinez, I've learned that sometimes the most significant victories come long after you think the game is over. And sometimes the most important records are the ones that exist only in the hearts and memories of people whose lives you've touched in small but meaningful ways. As autumn turned to winter in Cincinnati, Pete Rose's quiet presence at Children's Hospital continued to provide comfort, perspective, and hope to families facing medical challenges. His story had become interwoven with the stories of dozens of families, creating a network of connection and support that extended far beyond any individual diagnosis or treatment. The man who had once been known as Charlie Hustle had discovered a new form of hustle, not the aggressive pursuit of personal statistics and records, but the patient, consistent effort to show up for people who needed someone to understand their fears, acknowledge their strength, and remind them of their possibilities. In the end, Pete Rose's visits to Cincinnati Children's Hospital became a testament to the power of redemption, resilience, and human connection. His legacy would be measured not in hits or runs, but in moments of hope shared with families who needed to be reminded that difficult chapters don't have to define the entire story, and that sometimes the most meaningful victories are the ones that happen quietly, without fanfare, in small conference rooms where one person's hard-won wisdom becomes another's source of strength. The ripple effects of those quiet conversations would continue long after the families left the hospital, carried forward in the lessons children learned about courage, in parents' deeper understanding of resilience, and in the knowledge that even in the face of life's greatest challenges, there are always people willing to sit beside you and remind you that you are stronger than you know.